The discovery of oil in certain countries such as Oman, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar was monumental. Their economies changed radically, increasing both their productivity and income. For the scope of this video, we will focus on Oman because there is the most available data on the sectors of its economy, which will be more important later. We will also consider both the effects of political instability as well as OPEC's influence on their exports and industrial productivity. However, the focus will remain on how the sudden availability of a valuable commodity in the Middle East affected Oman. Before starting our analysis, it was important to understand the historical background of how oil refineries in the Middle East became vital providers for the rest of the world. After all, the Middle East was responsible for producing nearly 27.9 million barrels of oil per day in 2014, which is about 30% of world production. Indeed, early signs of oil refineries were found in Persia in 1905, and it was then estimated in 1944 that the Middle East possessed at least 25 billion barrels of crude oil. At that time, less than 5% of oil supply came from the Middle East, the predominant producer being the United States. However, due to the effects of World War II, the U.S. were worried about their own supplies decreasing and found their solution in the Middle East. For the scope of this video, the focus remains on Oman, who in 2014 exported 745,800 barrels per day, ranking them 17th worldwide for oil exports.
We will analyze the effect of oil exports on the development of Oman by looking at its GDP per capita adjusted for U.S. inflation versus industry as a percent of GDP per capita. Oil was first exported from Oman during the year 1967, explaining the major spike in percentage of GDP in industry, as well as a steady trend of increasing wealth. By tracking Oman, as well as two other countries, in this case Peru and Ecuador, which started at a similar level, it is seen that by 1980, Oman had about 3 times the GDP per capita of Peru and over 2.5 times that of Ecuador, despite having a similar starting place as both countries in 1961. Hence, we can see the scale of the boom in wealth of Oman in the 1960s to the 21st century, compared to countries that started in a similar place. Furthermore, since we are looking at industry as a percent of GDP, we should also consider the other two sectors, agriculture, represented by the size of dots, and services. We can see that as industry increases, just as precipitously, agriculture decreases as the industry produces more profit, which shows the development of Oman. We can also see that as industry declines, it is replaced by the service sector as Oman develops and becomes wealthier. Additionally, unlike other natural resources, such as lumber or fresh water, crude oil is a valuable commodity, so it is mostly useful to less developed countries that produce it to trade to wealthier countries that consume large amounts of oil, rather than use it domestically. We can see in this graph that the production of oil in Oman by far exceeds its consumption, with the area in between being oil exported. With this in mind, we can think about the jump in GDP per capita of Oman and other Middle Eastern oil exporting countries as 1. An increase in natural resources per capita, which increases productivity, as crude oil is a natural resource, which becomes valuable when developed countries demand more foreign oil. And 2, we can consider the increase in exports, since crude oil from the Middle East is sold as a commodity to the more developed countries.
With OPEC, also known as the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, having an important influence on Oman's production of oil as they form a cartel, it is seen how to a certain extent it dictates its economy. Many of the fluctuations on the graph can be explained through changes of policies and drops and rises of prices because of OPEC. However, another important factor that alters Oman's productivity is the political instability in the Middle East. This is clearly shown on the graph as in 1973, during the Arab-Israeli conflict, prices of oil increased greatly because of an embargo, which meant that Oman could cut exports without losing revenues. Since 1990, there have been 21 disruptive events that have occurred in the Middle East. From Operation Desert Storm in 1990 to the Anbar clashes in 2013, the area has had both major and minor political and military disruptive events. On the graph, when looking at those dates, it is seen that there is a decrease in exports, which follows from historical events. These sorts of events have had negative repercussions on oil production, which have damaged certain economies, including Oman's. This is reflected on the graph as we see a decrease in productivity.
To conclude, oil production has had massive impacts on the development of countries such as Oman due to the high exports and demand from other countries. At the same time, it is seen that OPEC, as well as political instability, are important factors to the level of productivity in Oman.